The snow fell in thick, silent curtains, blurring the billion lights of New York City into a soft, impressionistic watercolor. From the 70th floor of his Upper East Side penthouse, Arthur Blackwood watched the storm-blanket Central Park, a ghost-white sheet erasing the world he owned. Inside, the silence was a physical presence, more oppressive than the wind howling against the panoramic glass walls. Every piece of designer furniture, every priceless sculpture, was arranged with a cold, geometric precision that offered no comfort, only a testament to wealth. The air was sterile, filtered, carrying no scent of pine or cinnamon, just the faint chemical smell of clean. Outside, it was Christmas Eve, a night of warmth and connection. Inside, it was just another Tuesday, an empty space occupied by a man who had mastered the art of acquiring everything except happiness. He stood by the window, a silhouette in a flawlessly tailored suit, a uniform he wore even in the solitude of his home. His reflection was that of a king in an empty castle, silver hair perfectly combed, posture ramrod straight, and eyes that held the weariness of 1,000 victorious but meaningless battles. His gaze, however, was not on the storm, but on the two figures huddled in the far corner of the vast living room. Eleanor and her daughter, Lily, the last-minute cleaning crew, were now his prisoners, trapped by the blizzard. He saw them as an unwelcome disruption, an untidy variable in his controlled equation. The woman, Elena, held herself with a quiet dignity that irritated him, while the little girl, Lily, looked around the cavernous space not with intimidation, but with a wide-eyed wonder that felt like an accusation. Slowly, as if pulled by an invisible string, the small girl detached from her mother's side. Lily, all of 7 years old, walked with a child's unhesitating purpose toward the towering Christmas tree in the center of the room. It was a decorator's masterpiece, a perfect cone of green adorned with stark silver ornaments and cold white lights, utterly devoid of personality or history. Arthur watched, a muscle tightening in his jaw, expecting her to touch something, to smudge the perfection. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled figure. It was an angel, crudely fashioned from a candy wrapper, its foil wings catching the sterile light. With the gentle reverence of a sacred rite, she found an empty lower branch and carefully hung her humble offering among the flawless, expensive globes. After her task was complete, Lily didn't retreat. She turned and looked directly at him, her small form dwarfed by the immense room and the imposing man who commanded it. There was no fear in her eyes, only a simple, declarative truth. Her voice, clear and small, cut through the oppressive silence of the penthouse with an impossible weight, carrying a power that his billions could never purchase. She pointed a small finger toward the tree, at her tiny, shimmering angel, and spoke the words that would undo him, that would crack the foundation of the fortress he had built around his heart for decades. "Now," she announced with a soft, radiant smile, "it has a heart." The words hung in the air, not as an accusation but as a gift, and for the first time in years, Arthur Blackwood felt the sharp, unfamiliar sting of a genuine emotion. That impulsive invitation for dinner was a fracture in the bedrock of Arthur Blackwood's life. For the first time in decades, the long, polished mahogany table, usually set for one, was alive. Lily's laughter echoed against the glass walls, a sound so foreign and pure it seemed to scrub the sterility from the air. She chattered about school, her favorite cartoon characters, and the different shapes she saw in the falling snowflakes, all while meticulously building a small fortress out of mashed potatoes. Eleanor spoke softly, her conversation a gentle current of questions about his day, her words unburdened by any agenda. Arthur mostly listened, observing the effortless affection between mother and daughter, a bond so powerful and real it was like staring into the sun. He felt a profound, aching envy for a love that was given freely, without calculation or expectation of return. The silence that followed their departure to the guest suite was more deafening than before. It was a void now, where moments before there had been life. The spectre of another morning, another year of this crushing solitude terrified him more than any market crash. Logic abandoned him, replaced by a raw, primal fear of being alone. He found Elena in the hallway the next morning, her bag packed, ready to leave as soon as the storm cleared. The words came out before he could vet them through his usual cynical filter. He offered her a job, not just as a cleaner, but as his personal housekeeper. He offered her a permanent residence, a separate apartment in the same building, a salary that would change her life. It wasn't a business proposition, it was a desperate plea from a drowning man seeing a lifeboat. The first few weeks were an awkward, fragile truce with happiness. The penthouse began to transform. The faint, comforting scent of Elena's simple cooking, stews and baked bread, replaced the chemical smell of clean. A small, vibrant, crayon drawing of a sun with a smiling face, Lily's creation, was taped to the stainless steel refrigerator, a splash of defiant color in a world of monochrome. Arthur would find himself pausing to look at it, a strange warmth spreading in his chest. He watched them from the periphery, his study door ajar, as Lily did her homework at the kitchen island, her small voice humming a tune, while Elena moved with a quiet efficiency that was both professional and deeply calming. He was a spectator to a life he never knew he wanted, a life that was slowly seeping into the cracks of his fortress. Yet his mind was a battlefield. Every moment of peace was ambushed by a lifetime of suspicion. He had built his empire on the bedrock of mistrust, on the cold certainty that every hand extended to him had a price tag attached. His past was a ghost that sat beside him at his empty desk, whispering warnings. He remembered Victoria, his ex-wife, with a clarity that still felt like a fresh wound. He remembered her flawless beauty, her charming words that dripped with manufactured affection, and the surgical precision with which she had dismantled his life. She had praised his strength while methodically cataloguing his assets, professed her love while her lawyers drafted the terms of her departure, leaving with half his fortune and all of his faith in humanity. That singular betrayal had become his gospel. Love was a transaction, affection was leverage, and vulnerability was a fatal flaw. He had walled himself off from the world, convinced that emotional isolation was the only true form of security. Now, watching Elena, he felt that wall begin to crumble, and it terrified him. He saw her gentle smile, and his mind screamed that it was a tactic. He heard her kind words, and his memory replayed Victoria's calculated flatteries. He would look at this woman, who moved with such unassuming grace and asked for nothing, and see the phantom of the woman who had taken everything. His heart, so recently cracked open by a child's paper angel, was now caught between a desperate hope and the crushing weight of his own bitter history. The past didn't just haunt him, it walked back into his life. Victoria called, her voice as smooth and expensive as the silk she wore. She had heard rumors, she said, whispers on the elite grapevine about Arthur's new arrangement. She insisted on a visit, cloaking her intrusion in the guise of concern for his well-being. When she arrived, she surveyed the penthouse with an appraiser's eye, her gaze lingering on Lily's drawing on the refrigerator with a flicker of distaste. She was elegance personified, a vision of curated perfection, but her presence immediately sucked the nascent warmth from the room, leaving behind the familiar chill of calculation and control. Elena, in her simple clothes, met Victoria's condescending smile with a quiet, unshakable dignity that only seemed to fuel the other woman's disdain. Victoria cornered him later, a glass of champagne in her hand, her expression a mask of feigned sympathy. "Oh, Arthur," she began, her tone laced with a poison he knew all too well. I'm worried about you. You've always had a soft spot for a sob story. She gestured vaguely in the direction Eleanor had gone. Be careful. People like her, they are masters at playing the victim to get what they want. They know exactly which buttons to push. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that felt like a cold hand on his neck. You've fallen for that act before, remember. I would hate to see you get hurt again. Every word was a carefully chosen dart, aimed directly at the oldest and deepest of his wounds. When she left, the penthouse felt contaminated. Her perfume lingered in the air, a cloying scent of doubt and suspicion. Arthur stood by the window staring at the city lights, but all he could see was the wreckage of his past. Victoria's words echoed in his mind, twisting the simple kindness he had witnessed into something sinister and manipulative. He looked at Elena, now helping Lily with her coat, and suddenly he didn't see a resilient mother. He saw a schemer. He didn't see a loving child. He saw a pawn in a long, elaborate game. The fragile trust he had begun to build shattered into a million pieces, replaced by the familiar, in cold armor of his cynicism. His fear had been given a voice, and it was screaming at him. It's heartbreaking to see how easily an old wound can be weaponized by those who know just where to press. A person's journey toward healing is so delicate, and it takes so little to send them spiraling back into the darkness. Sharing these stories, these moments of vulnerability and struggle, is so important because it reminds us we're not alone in these battles. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to our channel. It's your support that allows us to keep bringing these powerful human experiences to light. His behavior began to shift, the change subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The easy conversations dwindled into clipped formal exchanges. He stopped lingering to watch Lily do her homework, retreating instead to the cold solitude of his study. He started leaving financial documents lying around, seemingly by accident, only to check later if they had been moved or looked at. It was a series of silent, cruel tests, born from a paranoia that was now eating him alive. Elena felt the change like a drop in barometric pressure, a coming storm. The warmth that had drawn her into this strange new life was being systematically extinguished, and the unspoken accusation in his eyes was more painful than any direct confrontation. She carried the weight of his suspicion with a quiet sorrow. She had seen hardship, had known poverty and loss, but this was a different kind of pain. It was the pain of being fundamentally misjudged. Late at night, in the sterile perfection of the apartment he provided, she would look at her sleeping daughter, her face a portrait of innocent trust, and her heart would ache. She wasn't looking for a handout. She was a survivor who had been offered a moment of grace, a chance for stability. She had allowed herself to hope that Arthur saw her for who she was, a mother fighting for her child, a woman who valued her own integrity above all else. Now, she felt like a specimen under a microscope, her every move analyzed for deceit. The tension in the penthouse became a palpable thing, a third presence in every room. Arthur was trapped in a vicious cycle. One moment, he would see Lily run to hug him when he came home, her affection so pure it was a physical blow to his cynicism, and he would feel a surge of shame. But then, Victoria's words would slither back into his thoughts, and he would pull away, his expression hardening. He was at war with himself, the man who yearned for connection, battling the tycoon who trusted no one. The home that had briefly promised salvation was reverting to its original state, a gilded cage, filled not with silence, but with the suffocating static of doubt and fear, setting the stage for a confrontation that felt both tragic and inevitable. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon, a day as grey and cold as the steel of the city skyline. Driven by a relentless paranoia, Arthur had been searching, looking for the proof his demons demanded. He found it in the form of a bank statement Elena had accidentally left on the kitchen counter. It showed a modest savings account, a few $1,000s painstakingly set aside. For him, it was not a sign of a mother's careful planning for her daughter's future. It was the seed money for a scam. He confronted her in the living room, his voice devoid of warmth, sharp as broken glass. He held the paper out like a weapon. "So this is what it's all about," he said, his words dripping with the poison Victoria had fed him. "I was a fool to think you were any different from the rest of them. Just another parasite looking for a score." Eleanor did not shout or cry out in her defense. Her reaction was a profound and wounded silence that seemed to suck all the air from the cavernous room. Her face, which had slowly begun to lose its lines of constant worry, now looked etched with a sorrow so deep it was almost physical. She simply looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not anger but a devastating disappointment. It was the look of someone who had allowed themselves a fragile moment of hope, only to see it carelessly shattered. Lily, who had been colouring at the coffee table, heard the cruelty in his tone, and looked from her mother's pained expression to Arthur's hardened face. Her lower lip began to tremble, and a single silent tear traced a path down her cheek. She had overheard everything, and her quiet heartbreak was a more damning verdict than any spoken word. It's in these moments of profound injustice that a person's true strength is revealed. Her dignity was not something that could be taken away by a false accusation. Sharing these stories of quiet resilience is so important because they remind us of the power of integrity. Your subscription is what makes it possible for us to continue shedding light on these powerful human experiences. Eleanor turned without a word and walked toward her room. The packing was swift and silent. There was little to gather. A few changes of clothes, Lily's worn teddy bear, and a handful of school books. Within minutes she emerged, holding her daughter's small hand. Lily's tear-stained face was buried in her mother's coat. Elena walked to the coffee table and placed a folded piece of paper on its polished surface, setting the small, crumpled foil angel directly on top of it. She gave the room one last look. A final, silent farewell to a dream that had turned into a nightmare, and then she was gone. The click of the closing door was the loudest sound Arthur had ever heard. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on him. He walked slowly to the coffee table, his movements stiff, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up the note. The little foil angel felt impossibly heavy. He unfolded the paper. The message was written in Elena's neat, simple script. "Thank you for the opportunity. I thought you saw who we were, not what we didn't have. Keep the angel. Your tree needs it more than we do." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. In that instant, the entire fortress of his cynicism crumbled into dust. He wasn't a savvy protector of his wealth. He was a coward. He hadn't driven out a threat. He had exiled the only real family he had ever known. His fear hadn't saved him. It had just guaranteed he would be alone. A raw, primal panic seized him. He didn't stop for a coat or to even change his shoes. He bolted from the apartment, a man undone, running on pure, desperate adrenaline. He found them at a bus stop several blocks away. Two small figures huddled together against the biting wind as snowflakes began to drift from the iron-grey sky. Lily was crying softly, and Elena was holding her tight, whispering words of comfort he couldn't hear. He stopped a few feet away, his chest heaving, the cold air burning his lungs. All the power, all the authority he had wielded his entire life was meaningless. He was just a lonely old man who had made a terrible mistake. "Please," he said, his voice cracking, broken, "don't go." It wasn't an order from a boss or a request from a benefactor. It was the desperate, humble plea of a man begging for his heart to be allowed to come home. He didn't take them back to the penthouse. That glass tower was a monument to his isolation. a place where trust could never truly grow under the shadow of his wealth. Instead, Arthur understood that for their relationship to be real, the foundation had to change. A few days later, he took Elena to a quiet, tree-lined street in Queens and handed her a set of keys. He had bought a comfortable, sunlit house and had already put the deed entirely in her name. "This is yours," he explained, his voice steady but filled with an emotion she had never heard before. "I don't want you to ever feel dependent on me. I want you to be with me because you choose to be, knowing you always have a safe place to call your own." It was the most profound business deal he had ever made, trading a fraction of his fortune for a chance at a genuine human connection. Their lives found a new, gentle rhythm. The cold penthouse became what it always should have been, just an office, a place of business he left at the end of the day. His home was now in Queens, filled with the scent of Elena's cooking and the sound of Lily's laughter. He shed his tailored suits for comfortable sweaters, learning the simple joy of reading a bedtime story or helping with third-grade math homework at the kitchen table. He started picking Lily up from school, and the other parents slowly grew accustomed to the sight of the former Wall Street titan waiting patiently by the gates, his face lit up with a smile only Lily could inspire. He wasn't a boss or a benefactor anymore. He was learning, step by careful step, how to be a father, a grandfather, and a partner, discovering a richness in these small daily acts of love that his billions could never provide. 2 years later, Christmas had returned, but it lived in a different house. Eleanor's home was a beacon of warmth and light, every surface alive with decorations, dozens of shimmering foil angels made by Lily over the years, hung from the branches of their Christmas tree. Arthur, Elena, and a now 9-year-old Lily were placing ornaments together, their laughter echoing through the cozy living room. He looked at them, his heart full, and announced that the Blackwood Foundation had officially opened its doors that week. He had used his power and influence to create an organization dedicated to providing housing, legal aid, and support for single mothers, ensuring that women like Elena would have the security to build their lives without fear or judgment. He had turned the greatest mistake of his life into a legacy of hope for countless others. The final ornament was placed on the tree, a new, slightly crumpled angel made from a candy wrapper. Nearby, on the mantelpiece, sat a framed photograph of the three of them, taken last summer at the beach, their faces bright with unguarded joy. It was the portrait of a family, built not on bloodlines or obligations, but on the quiet, powerful foundations of forgiveness and choice. A story like this shows that the most valuable things in life are the connections we fight to repair and the trust we learn to give. Being able to bring these journeys to you is a true gift, and your subscription is what makes it possible for us to continue sharing them. They had found their heart, not in a sterile penthouse, but in the simple, profound love they had built together.